Welcome to the Moral of the Story podcast, a show in which two cousins, a Harvard lawyer and a Baptist pastor, discuss good stories and explore their moral and ethical meanings from a Christian perspective. I am the pastor, Colin Trisler. She is the lawyer, Evie and I. And Evie, today we're going to begin discussing Jane Austen's timeless novel, Pride and Prejudice. And in this episode, we're going to cover chapters 1 through 23. And our plan is to take a deep dive into the characters of the story, the characters of Elizabeth Bennet and her family, as well as Mr. Darcy, Mr. Bingley, Charlotte Lucas, Mr. Wickham, and of course, the always awkward and always entertaining Mr. Collins. But before we discuss these characters, I thought it would be appropriate to start things off by talking about the opening line of the book and how it sets up the story. Pride and Prejudice contains one of literature's most well-known opening lines. And the opening line is this: "It's a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." Now, Evie, you're very familiar with this story. What are your thoughts on why this opening line is so iconic?
Well, I think she's telling something true about human nature. Right in that first line, we get a sense that in this society, a marriage is in part to secure a fortune. You automatically get a sense of this society's values, which is marriage to a wealthy man is highly valued. And when this man comes into the neighborhood, he's not necessarily going to be seen maybe as a human being that you would connect with on a moral level, but as maybe in some ways an object to be used. He's got a certain position and you want to use him or his position or his money for, your family's benefit or whatever. All of that, she conveys that in this one sentence. It's concise. It's funny. You see the truth in it. You still see, I think obviously in our society now, people still think this way, looking at, this is an eligible man. Typically, I guess sometimes a woman might be viewed that way, but more often a man would be looked at for what he can do for you. You look at all those movies about a woman who falls in love with a prince. This is just a recurrent theme, that a man is valued for his position in society. And so it's humorous, it's concise, and I think it says something true.
She really does do an excellent job of packing so much into that one line. That one line, it really does set the tone for the book. It kind of gives you that, like you said, the outlook of the characters there, and their approach to marriage and their approach to, social climbing and social structure, their motivations, the goals of the characters in this book, the challenge, of the book. It is, like you said, it's a very concise summary of the plot in that one line. It's kind of like, Genesis 1:1. In the beginnings, God created the heavens and the earth. And then you know what's going to happen there, and it's an excellent summary of what's about to unfold, and it also does a good job of kind of giving you an example of the style of writing that Jane Austen that she does. It's got writing with humor. It's kind of done with a wink, a little bit. It sets the tone for the story's portrayal of marriage, especially by some of the characters, and I think it does a really good job of that. And you mentioned, how people are kind of seen as objects. And in the following paragraph, Austen writes that such a man, a man with wealth, he must be in want of a wife. Such a man is considered as the rightful property of a someone or other of their daughters. So men are viewed here, kind of like you said, object as objects. They are objectified, and just as men can objectify women. The women here, that's how they objectify the men, and we could it
goes both ways.
It exactly does.
This was more than 200 years ago. She was keyed into it, and we still see the same thing today. But I think in this story, you see a social structure that makes it easy to objectify people, but she's showing you a relationship that doesn't necessarily go against social convention. Ultimately, we all know where the story is going to end up, which is that Elizabeth is going to make a good match with a wealthy man. But it's a match of two human beings who are meeting on a human level and are going to improve each other as human beings. So she's not necessarily saying, well, let's completely destroy this social structure because it's so bad and oppressive. She's questioning it. She's showing the ways that it allows people to abuse each other, men and women. But she's also showing, well, how do we make this work? How do we have a true and authentic relationship given that we live in a society that makes it easy to use each other. And that's going to be true of every society, right?
Exactly. And what it does is it shows what happens, and you want to bring it to a moral and a Christian perspective here. It shows how sin can get in the way and really corrupt relationships. When you kind of view relationships through a sinful lens, what can this do for me? Only what, because that's kind of, as we'll get into it later, that's kind of how Mr. Collins approached his proposal to Elizabeth. This is what she can do for me. Not so much what we can do together, but what she can do for me. And I think that that's what happens when you, it shows that sinful element that you have to be careful to push aside when you're trying to get into a relationship. You don't want to enter into a relationship for self-centered reasons. You want to have self-interested reasons for getting into a relationship, but not self-centered reasons. And speaking of relationships here, let's get what this is leading to in here, and that is their attitude towards marriage. Evie, what do you think this opening line and what we've talked about explain kind of how these characters view marriage? What is their approach to marriage? What are they trying to gain out of marriage? Some of the more superficial characters here, what are they trying to gain out of marriage?
Well, for a woman, if you're born into a certain class, which Elizabeth Elizabeth is part of the landed gentry. Her father is a gentleman. He doesn't work. If you're born into that class, for a woman, you either marry a man of that class so that you can be provided for and stay in the same class that you were born in, or you might sink to a lower level, but there isn't an option where you're going to go out and get a job and have a comfortable life. I mean, you're either going to have a wealthy relative and be provided for. That, and that's what happened to Jane Austen herself. She never married, so she lived off her brothers for her whole life. She didn't actually live very long. She died at about 41, 42. But you didn't have a lot of options. If you wanted to have a secure position, you could marry a man from the same class as your father, or be a burden on your relatives. And that explains a lot of what we see Charlotte do later. The choices that she makes are understandable. She uses marriage to secure a certain social position. Now, this is not a society that doesn't value love and affection. I mean, it's certainly the women want to marry for love, and the men want to marry for love. Mrs. Bennet wants her daughters to marry a wealthy man, but she wants them to marry a handsome man. She understands why the younger daughters are running after soldiers, and they like to look at the cute guys and gossip about them. I mean, I think she understands all of that. I mean, and I think, again, it kind of goes back to that sort of fantasy movie that we see repeatedly, the handsome prince. She wants the daughters to get to marry the handsome prince who has all of it. He's wealthy, he's charming, and he's got all the position that's going to secure. He's got everything to give them a secure life, and that's understandable. I don't think Jane Austen takes an unrealistically romantic view of marriage. She does understand that money is important going into a marriage. If you're going to build a family and provide for children, it's something a woman needs to think about. She can't just say, well, only love matters. I can just marry anyone who has no money, is unable to provide for me. I don't, and Jane Austen doesn't take that position. She thinks money is important, but it's not the only important thing.
Right. And I think that you mentioned it earlier, the marriage itself here is portrayed kind of as a business arrangement, or some sort of social arrangement, as opposed to authentic affection, in an authentic relationship. And I think, as we're going to see, a lot of the characters fall into that trap. And that's what makes Elizabeth so appealing, is the fact that she doesn't fall into that trap. She wants to kind of buck the system and marry for genuine reasons. And I think that Jane Austen does a very good job, just in that opening line alone, of conveying all of this subtext, in that one line. She does an excellent job of that. So we've talked about marriage, and then we go from that, and we immediately are brought into the relationship of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, Elizabeth's parents. And so I think here they kind of set the template of what these sort of superficial marriages, I don't want to say affectionless marriages, because I don't want to say there's no affection between the two of them, but it doesn't seem to be like a happy romantic sort of marriage. It seems to be, kind of just a contractual union between the two. And we get an immediate taste of their relational dynamic. So what do you think of the relational dynamic between Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet, as Jane Austen puts right here at the beginning? What do you think about those two?
Well, you immediately see he doesn't respect his wife at all. Now, when I first read this, I thought Mr. Bennet was hilarious, and he is funny. He's funny and he's charming. I think when you get through the whole book and you look back at it with some perspective, you realize that he's kind of a jerk face. I mean, he's terrible to his wife, actually. I mean, it's funny. You understand it because she's so silly. He has a point, and yet he could help his wife to be more than what she is. They've sort of become the worst versions of themselves because of the way their marriage works. She does silly things. He makes fun of her. She's saying all these things like, you delight in vexing me. Well, he does delight in vexing her. He's doing these things just to irritate her because he thinks it's hilarious when she acts extremely silly. I mean, he is not a good husband. He's a smart man. He's married to a silly woman, and he has not made the best of it. He's decided to just make fun of her, and he makes fun of her in front of his daughters. He doesn't show respect for his daughters, actually, either. The only one he seems to like is Elizabeth. So Mr. Bennet has a lot of one-liners, and it's entertaining in the book. And I think you can see that Jane Austen has sympathy for Mr. Bennet. Because I mean, you can just tell from the narrative voice is not that different from Mr. Bennet's voice, and it's not that different from Elizabeth Bennet's voice. Some of the witty one-liners that you get through, some of those are the narrator, and you get. I think that's Jane Austen's voice. Mr. Bennet's, I think he's kind of got a similar turn of mind, and I think she's showing us in this first chapter with this. I mean, first of all, they don't have a good marriage. There's a lack of respect between them. But she's also showing us what Elizabeth could become, right? If she ends up in a bad marriage, right? And that shows us some of the stakes of some of what is at stake in this story.
That's exactly right. Because does Mr. Bennet strike you as an inherently happy or satisfied person?
Yeah, I don't think he's satisfied with his life. He's not miserable. He's got a lot that's good that's going for him, but he has been disappointed in his marriage, and he hasn't made the best of it. He's not a virtuous man in a lot of important ways. I mean, he doesn't, you think his wife is wanting to tell him something, and instead of encouraging her to speak and showing her that she's valued, he just says, well, you want to tell me and I have no objection to hearing it. Well, that's funny. Okay. But that's not the way you should treat other people.
Right. He's very aloof with his family in general. He seems to be he wants to just kind of retreat into his books or whatever, and he wants to kind of get lost in his own little world and kind of just stay arm's distance between him and his family, keep that arm's distance between him and his family. And he does, he looks back and he laughs at his wife, which my wife and I, Amanda and I have, we've made an agreement. We don't talk bad about each other in public to other people, even if we're joking. You know what I mean? We just don't do that. That's just the agreement that the two of us have reached, because I just don't see that as very respectful. You should always talk favorably of the people that you genuinely care about. And Mr. Bennet is always kind of laughing at Mrs. Bennet. She's a source of contempt for him, and he kind of looks at her and laughs, and not laughs in a good way, but he's laughing at her, and he keeps himself distant from, he's not really as involved as he should be in the lives of his daughters, it seems. He's just kind of like, well, whatever. And we can kind of get into this later on in later episodes when we get into stuff with Lydia, but he kind of mentions at one point, it seems the best thing for Lydia is just to get her out of the house and almost out of our lives, and then she can stop being this source of trouble. You know what I mean? And what kind of father really thinks that way about his children, But he calls his daughters silly, I think, at one point. He's got a very kind of condescending tone toward them. And he does, I guess he's a good sitcom husband. He makes a good little one-liner here, And if the job is to make the people laugh, he's doing a good job as a father. But life is not a sitcom here, and he's really ridiculing the people that he should be most supportive of. And I won't after. Bingley gets the name Bingley gets introduced, and Mr. Bennett, mentions he talked with Bingley at that point, and all the ladies are all in a hubbub, oh, why didn't you tell us at all that, they're just kind of going a little, they are acting a little silly there, and
but he set them up for it. He set them up to be silly.
He did, because he didn't tell them at first, and he kind of strung them along and all that, And after he mentioned about speaking with Mr. Bingley, Mr. Bennett left the room. It says Austen says fatigued with the raptures of his wife. He just got tired of all her histrionics, and just was fatigued, aggravated with her. Just I can't take this anymore, and left the room. And I really don't have much respect for Mr. Bennett as a man, And I do think you made an excellent point. I do see that as a future for Elizabeth if she does what other people think she should do.
Yes, because she's similar to her father in a lot of ways, in a lot of good ways. She's witty, she's clever, she's smarter than other people, and she can see through a lot of these things, and she's not silly. But she needs to learn a way to relate to other people that's more respectful, or that's what she could end up being.
Right. And let me know here if I'm mistaken, okay? Mr. Bennett doesn't seem too concerned about what's going to happen to his family after he dies. He just is kind of like, well, that's the way it is, and what can we do about it? Did I miss something, or am I wrong about that? Does he really he doesn't seem to think about it?
I think that's an interesting question. Okay, so we learn later in the book that, so he's got £2,000 per year income. I mean, you can translate that out. He gets maybe $160,000, $200,000 a year. He's got a comfortable income, but it's easy for 5 daughters and a wife to spend all of that, right? So he's never saved anything. He knows that he hasn't done his duty by his family. So I think there may be some internal tension here. I think like when he's joking around with Mrs. Bennett saying, well, you may not end up being thrown out of this house because I may be the one who survives you. And he's making a joke out of it because I think he does feel guilty about the position he's put his family in.
Okay. Well, I
think that he is I think he feels I think he has a conscience, and these things do bother him a little bit, and he covers it all over with this stuff. I think this is maybe part of why he's so aloof. He doesn't deal with things that he needs to deal with, right?
Right. Yes, exactly. He just kind of kicks things off, or he just chooses not to think about things. He chooses not to take on those responsibilities. He'd rather just kind of get lost in some sort of distraction. It's hard for me to respect a man who takes that kind of lackadaisical attitude toward his family. And so I really don't have much. Right from the get-go, you can kind of pick that up about Mr. Bennett. And he really got started off on the wrong foot with me, and he never got back on the right foot. You know what I mean? He never really did redeem himself. I have about as much respect for Mr. Bennett as I do for Mrs. Bennett, okay? Because she is equally annoying and equally disrespectful in her own way. He seems detached from his family. He doesn't really care what's going on. Mrs. Bennett is so fickle, is kind of a good word I can use to describe her. Her petty concerns about just social acceptance or social hierarchy. And we'll talk about this in a later episode. But like when Lydia runs away with Wickham, and as much shame as that's bringing on, and she's worried about what kind of dress she's going to wear, or and she's completely worried about the superficial thing, whereas the more meaningful thing, she doesn't really address that. And I think I think Austen said at one point that Elizabeth was the least dear to her of all of her children. It's almost like Mrs. Bennett. She has her daughter, and Jane was her favorite, I guess, because she thought that she was the most. She was the most beautiful. She was the most likely to get married to somebody wealthier, the best catch or whatever. It's almost like she's got her daughters ranked on a college football ranking system. This one's a number 1. This one's a number 5. This one's a clear number 2, And I just see her being so concerned with everybody else's opinion and that she never really showed any true affection. Not saying she didn't care, I'm not saying that, but she just seemed real superficial to me. What are your thoughts about Mrs. Bennet?
I agree. I think she's silly, and I think Lydia is the favorite child because she's the one who's
really?
the most like her mother. And I think that's stated later that Lydia is the favorite. Now, I think Jane is favored over Elizabeth because Jane is the one who is more likely to make the grand match. But I think Lydia is the favorite. Mrs. Bennet is silly, but I think she is less blameworthy than Mr. Bennet because she doesn't know any better. She's not capable of teaching herself. Mr. Bennet has the intellectual capacity to know better. Mm-hmm. And he is in a position where he could have helped his wife to become better, but he chose not to do so. Right.
And what are your thoughts about their relationship, just generally, and your thoughts about how the dynamic of their relationship? I wouldn't say it's totally affectionless, but it's not necessarily a really healthy relationship, would you say?
I think that's right. He's making fun of her.
Yes.
She doesn't. She realizes that he is taking delight in vexing her and all that. She doesn't seem to pick up on the degree of contempt that he actually has for her, which is probably good.
She's too
do you think that's right?
Oh, I think it's totally correct. She's too dense to pick up on it. I mean, you could say he's sitting there.
Yes, I think that's right.
It's almost like he's trying to make himself laugh, and he's saying things that she doesn't get. And they're meant to be these little daggers, and she's probably doing her own, but she's not listening to him, just like he's not really listening to her, and
that's a great point. Yeah.
They just don't really seem to have any affection. No, like I said, that's the kind of marriage, a marriage that is low on affection, low on respect, low on genuine. It's not really grounded in anything, and that would lead for a long, miserable, and bitter life. And I think Elizabeth sees that. I think she sees the marriage that her parents have, and I think that's one reason why she is so determined to, I'm going to make my own decision here. I don't want to I can't end up like this. I really think she has that attitude. We're going to do a little deeper dive into Elizabeth here in just a second because she's the main character. So I want to introduce all these supporting characters first, and then we'll get to Elizabeth. So let's move on and discuss the introduction, of the aforementioned Mr. Bingley and his friend, the infamous Mr. Darcy. And we get the introduction to that. Now I got to say, I really liked the character of Elizabeth. I really found a lot in common with her. I also found a lot in common with Darcy too. I every time Darcy would say something, and there was a lot of conflicting opinions about Darcy, and every time he came on, I was really interested in what he had to say because I just really admire people who just don't really seem to care about what other people think of. And they like playing that game. And so let's talk a little bit about Bingley and Darcy. Now they have a pretty steady friendship here that in spite of their great opposition of characters, when you say they're not really similar, Bingley and Darcy, I mean, right? On the surface, you wouldn't really put those two together.
Yeah, I think they're pretty much opposites in a lot of ways. I mean, Mr. Bingley is genuinely just very eager to please everybody, and not necessarily from any kind of bad motives either, but I think he really does value other people. He goes in that ballroom and he says, well, I've never met so many pleasant girls in my life. I've never met such nice people. And I think he's totally sincere. He really believes all that.
Yes.
And Mr. Darcy is kind of like, no, this is a country ball and these girls are not that pretty. And I mean, what are we even doing? Yeah, but I mean, I think it's just the old opposites attract. I think that Darcy, he's got his flaws and Bingley has his flaws, but I think maybe they are drawn to each other. They see something in each other that, that they admire and respect. And I think maybe just at heart, they're both good people and they get along even though they're different. And, I think it's a good friendship for both of them.
One thing I really...
Most of the time, you do see some problems with the stronger of the two controlling
Well, that's what I was about to say. It's very clear that Bingley really trusts Darcy, and as well he should. He really leans heavily on his opinion, and there are times when Bingley maybe is not as decisive as he should be. He's not as certain about what he should do, and so he asks Darcy what he thinks, and then Bingley is kind of tempted to just do whatever whatever bit of advice Darcy gives. And I'm not saying Darcy is trying to manipulate Bingley, but
No.
Bingley is that's the wrong thing to do, is to let other people make up your mind for you. Take somebody else's word for it. And, well, what would you do in this situation? Okay, that's what I'm going to do. I think Bingley kind of falls into that a little bit with Darcy, but they are very good friends, and they really do have a mutual respect and affection for each other. Wouldn't you agree?
I think that's right. And one thing I like about this is Jane Austen is showing really complex decisions, that it isn't clear that, oh, you should always just go with your own gut. You should always only rely on your own judgment, or that you should always listen to the judgment of other people. I mean, the truth is you need both. You need to get input from other people, but at the end of the day, you also have to make your own decisions. And at some point you need to trust your own perceptions of things. Like when, Bingley should have trusted his own perception of Jane's feelings, but that's volume 2. That's for the next episode. But that's what I like, is that she's portraying like really complex human relationships where there really aren't clear answers. We see sort of the pros and cons of being this way or being the other way. And I think that's true to life, that we're all kind of trying to reach a balance. You don't want to go all the way over this way, but you don't want to go all the way over this way either. I mean, that's kind of the nature of virtue, is it's the mean between two extremes. And I think with Darcy, he does have good judgment. Bingley is right to rely on his judgment, but does he take it too far? Yes, he does.
I think that the Darcy is clearly the more clever of the two, and I think maybe even Austen, as the narrator, said this. He's more clever, and I think some superior of understanding, something like that. So Darcy is the more intellectually capable, the more wise of the two, and the more sure of himself than Bingley is. And not that Bingley's a dunce or something. He's not a bimbo or anything like that. He's just. I don't think he does like to please people. I don't think he has any nefarious motive behind it. I think he's just kind of a naturally friendly person, and Darcy is kind of antisocial, I guess would be a polite way to put it. And the friendship there is really it's really interesting, considering the differences between the two. Bingley, I think it says here, Bingley was sure of being liked wherever he appeared. Darcy was continually giving offense, something like that. And I think that pretty much sums it up. But if Jane mentioned at one point, Jane is always seems to have something nice to say about somebody. And she said regarding Darcy, Miss Bingley told me that he never speaks much unless among his intimate acquaintance. With them, he is remarkably agreeable. And so, she said that good thing about Darcy. And I think that's true. Darcy's kind of, bristly and rigid, and until you earn his trust or you earn his affection, then I wouldn't say he's a completely different person, but he's more open, and the shades kind of fall down, and you see, who the real Darcy is. And I think Charlotte replied, this is one thing I always thought was kind of funny too throughout the story. Jane said that good thing about Darcy, and Charlotte, I think it was, she said, I do not believe a word of it. If he had been agreeable, he would have behaved, however she thought he would have behaved. If he would have been agreeable, he would have done exactly.
Oh, it was Mrs. Bennet who said that.
Was that Mrs. Bennet who said it? And I said, but he didn't. And then they always speak in such absolutes. Everybody says that he is eaten up with pride. Yeah, everyone says it. Nobody has anything good to say about Darcy at all. And if anybody does, they're totally mistaken. And I just think if everyone says it, therefore it must be true. And that's kind of, it gives a good glimpse into their attitude about the world. It's like public opinion or public perception almost establishes truth in these people's minds. What's true doesn't really matter. What does everybody else say? What does everybody else think? That's what's true. And I just think it's funny how I always would laugh. Miss Bennett, Mrs. Bennett especially, would always speak in such absolute. She always took whatever she said as the gospel truth. You know, I always thought she was very sure of her opinions. You know, and I thought that,
however contradictory they may be from what she thought yesterday,
like she truly believed whatever was coming out of her mouth at that time. You know, she could say something in one breath and then turn around and say something completely opposite and yet believe both to be true when she's saying it, you know. And there was another conversation they were having about Darcy, and I think it was Mary. It was Mary. She said, a person may be proud without being vain. Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves, vanity to what we would have others think of us. And Elizabeth replied, of course, that's very true. And then she gives the classic line, I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. And I think what Mary, we'll continue talking a little bit about, Darcy and Bingley, but I really think she does give a good example or a good distinction between pride and vanity. There is a genuine, healthy pride, your opinion of yourself. Darcy has good reason to be self-assured. And there's nothing wrong. Confidence, self-confidence and self-respect that's a healthy pride. You want to have that. Vanity is caring about what other people think of you. And I think that's what a lot of the characters in this story are guilty of. They're not guilty of pride so much, and maybe they are to an extent, but more about vanity, because that's what struck me is everybody cares so much about what other people think. Not what their own independent judgments, but the opinions of other people. Am I right about that? What do you think?
I think you're right, but let me pose a hypothesis about Mr. Darcy, which is that it's pointed out, that Mr. Bingley was sure of being liked wherever he went. Mr. Darcy was continually giving offense. We view Mr. Darcy as being so self-assured, but I think it sort of comes out that I think he isn't socially self-assured. I think he's aware that when he goes in company that he tends to offend people. And I think he may be just a little like Mr. Bennet in that he has stopped caring. Like the reason he comes across as he just doesn't care is because he's sort of taken the attitude, well, I'm no good at this, I might as well not even try.
Yeah, I think that's true. Do you think part of it's like a defense mechanism? I mean, he knows he's got wealth. He knows that he's going to have, and it's shown in the story, girls coming up to him, knowing they don't really care about him. They just care about the provision that he can give. And so he kind of has this antisocial demeanor to kind of ward off the phonies. That's kind of the impression I got of Darcy as well. That, not saying it was completely a defense mechanism, but maybe he, everybody's got these kind of latent characteristics, and then sometimes, like, actors do it. They maybe on like a reality show or something. Like I think of Curb Your Enthusiasm, which, Larry David from Seinfeld. Now, that's not a reality show, but he plays himself on there, except he doesn't play the real Larry David. He plays the real Larry David multiplied by about 10, for entertainment purposes. Do you think that Darcy does have some antisocial attitude, but he kind of cranks it up a little bit to weed out the phonies? That was the impression I got.
That's interesting. I haven't thought about it that way before because, maybe I'm just sort of putting myself in his place. I think that he doesn't find it easy to be charming the way Bingley is. And I think that he doesn't make an effort to do what he can. I think it's almost like he knows that he is someone who's very intelligent, who's got very good judgment. And I think he finds it exhausting to try to get people that he thinks are not as smart as he is, and they're not as smart as he is, to like him by doing all these things. I think he may consider that in part a waste of his time, but also just he can't do it easily, and he doesn't see the value in doing it. Right. Whereas I think Elizabeth Bennet can do those things easily.
Right, yeah.
And so she doesn't understand why he doesn't go to the effort. I
agree. He doesn't really put forth any effort, and you got to be social. I'm as introverted as people as introverts are. I'm not psychotic.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
I can be around people and I can have a conversation with. I'm a pretty good conversationalist. I think. I can talk about pretty much anything. And here's just a little rabbit trail. One secret I learned I used to be a newspaper reporter. If you want to have a good conversation with somebody, just ask them questions about themselves. That's all you've got to do. Just get somebody talking about themselves,
That's right.
and then let them do the talking. That's really all you got to do.
Mhm.
And but Darcy, he doesn't want to put forth, because he's not really interested in what somebody else has to say anyway. So he just, I'm not going to put forth any effort here. Whereas Mr. Bingley is all smiles and very approachable. Darcy's very standoffish. It's hard to approach him. And like I said, I found that friendship to be quite entertaining, because it is such an opposites attract sort of dynamic there. And that's let's talk a little bit more about the contrast between Bingley and Darcy. Bingley, he's good looking, he's gentlemanlike, pleasant personality. I think she said he had easy and unaffected manners, something like that. Darcy, I thought this was really funny. Darcy drew the attention of the room with his fine, and this is a quote here, fine, tall person, handsome features, noble, he was noble, and the report, which was in general circulation within 5 minutes of his entrance of his having 10,000 a year. So Darcy also drew a lot of social attention as well, because he had a lot of good exterior characteristics, right? And it's like Darcy was thought, I think it says, to be a better catch at first, seeing as how he had more money, he was better looking than Bingley. And then Austen says here, this lasted about half the evening, till his manners gave a disgust, which turned the tide of his popularity. For he was determined to be proud, to be above his company, and be pleased, and not all his large estate in Derbyshire could then save him from having a most forbidding, disagreeable countenance, and being unworthy to be compared to his friend Mr. Bingley. So it's like, and when they first walk in, Darcy seems to be the superior, and he kind of is objectively, on a superficial level, the superior, until you get to talking to him. And then he's just so disgusting. His personality, his looks, his money, his stature. The personality. I can't. Dealing with him is not worth those things. I just cannot stand the man at all. So I'll go to Mr. Bingley, who's at least socially, a little bit more socially capable. I thought that was funny. But
don't you think some of that is just sort of human nature and pride of, well, if you think you're better than I am, well, then I'm better than you. I mean, Elizabeth sort of has the self-awareness to see that that's why she's responding that way. Well, I might have found his pride easier to deal with if he hadn't injured mine. Right, I think that shows a lot of self-awareness. I think that's why all those people react that way to Mr. Darcy. I mean, if he thinks he's better than they are, well, we don't like you either.
I'm almost of two minds here. Darcy gets a bad rap because he's really a good person, right?
Yeah.
But he kind of brings a lot of that bad rap on himself too. It's like he knows that this is the attitude toward him, and so he kind of plays that up a little bit, maybe for his own entertainment, maybe just because he's lazy, he doesn't want to socially interact. Yeah, I put it right here. Bingley, he chided Darcy. Okay, they're at the ball, Bingley's ball. Okay. And Bingley chided Darcy for standing about by yourself in this stupid manner. You had much better dance. Only a real friend could speak to Darcy that way. So you knew that Bingley was his actual friend, because you're standing here by yourself in this stupid manner. It looks bad. You better go dance. And Darcy replied, I certainly shall not. You know how I detest it. Unless I'm particularly acquainted with my partner, at such an assembly as this, it would be insupportable. Your sisters are engaged, and there is not another woman in the room who it would not be a punishment for me to stand up with, which is really a harsh thing to say, And Elizabeth heard him, of course, and this kind of set her with a bad attitude toward him and everything. But Bingley's charming. He's kind of social. Darcy is antisocial, and I found the friendship between them to be real, because only a true friend could say, you're standing around like a stupid idiot, go dance. And the other guy say, I'm not going to do it. All these women are dogs here, and there's nobody here I want to dance with, so I'm not going to. And then they still remain friends. It's just that there's genuine affection there when you can talk so bluntly to somebody else, you know, and still remain friendly afterwards. You know, that's when you know that there's true affection. And we'll get into this later too. That's what draws Darcy's affection for Elizabeth, is her penchant to speak bluntly, and he really likes that, because
He
that's
likes
what he
that,
does.
yeah.
You know. So anyway, what do you think about this with Darcy and Bingley? I thought it was a pretty humorous pairing, you know, between the two, and I always kind of lit up when they were in the room. You know, kind of reminded me like on Friends. Anytime Chandler and Joey came into the room, I was kind of like, all right, this is something funny is going to happen here. You know, and it seems like anytime Bingley and Darcy were on the page together, I was kind of like, okay, this is going to be good. You know, I just really liked the interplay between the two of them.
Well, and she's so good at that, and making two characters who both seem like real people. I mean, and like with Darcy, like what we're talking about, he's not all good or all bad. I mean, he's got his flaws. Like you understand his perspective, but you also understand why other people see him the way they do. And then Bingley, he's a good guy too, but he's not. He's got his flaws as well. Right. I mean, you've got these two people who seem like real people, and you're right. Like the way they're interacting, they seem like real friends. I mean, this takes real observation of human nature. I mean, I think she really understands. Jane Austen really understood how people work and how they relate to each other, and you see that in all the different relationships that she creates, and they're all different. I mean, there's some writers who do other things better, but all of the dialogue kind of sounds the same. You know, you get any two characters in the room, and the conversation kind of plays out the same way. I mean, with Jane Austen, that's not the way it is. I mean, all the characters sound different. Mm-hmm. And the way they interact with each other, the way Elizabeth interacts with Darcy is different from the way Darcy interacts with Bingley. And yet you see the consistency of the characters across that. I mean, I think that's what makes her a great.
Right, yeah, and that's what makes for good characters too, is they've got their pluses and they've got their minuses. You know, they're not just totally good and they're not just totally bad. That's what makes for really interesting characters, and interesting characters make for good stories, you know, because you can have a good plot and kind of flat characters, and that's really going to diminish a story's quality. But if you have really interesting characters, it doesn't really matter what situation they're in. If you really care about the characters and they're really interesting and involved in complex characters, you can watch them in any circumstance. So to me, good characters really determine whether a story is really entertaining or not, really rewarding or not. And good characters have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. And that's when, you know, the growth of the character, they learn to kind of grow out of, or at least manage their weaknesses better, you know. And I think that, you know, these characters do an excellent job of that. You know, Bingley and Jane and Darcy and Elizabeth as well. All right, we've kind of looked at this from the guy's perspective here. Let's kind of hang around here at the ball for just a second. Now, I want to look at it from the girl's perspective. One thing I thought was extremely funny, okay? It says Bingley planned, the girls heard this, okay? They knew the ball was coming, and they heard that Bingley planned to bring 12 ladies and 7 gentlemen with him. And Austen says the girls grieved over such a number of ladies. You know, they're there. They're on the hunt, you know? And the more ladies there are and the fewer men, that really decreases their chances. You know what I mean? So 12 ladies, oh no, you know, they got really worried about that. And but then they were comforted. They were comforted to know that 6 of the ladies were relatives, and that really left only 6 eligible options, which was much better for them. You know, better odds. You know, so they're there to score. You know, the ladies are there to score. They're there to score a man. They're there to score a husband. And I just thought, you know, the ladies are playing the odds there. They're on the hunt, man. Oh, no, 12? Oh, no, that's really bad for us. Oh, but it gets shortened. Oh, well, we feel a little bit better now. And, you know, I just thought that the ladies are seen in their own feminine way as being just as aggressive as men are in circumstances like this. You know, I found that to be really good. She really does strike a really good balance between men and women. One's not played up to be better than the other. The men are played up. Their strengths are good, and their bad habits are on display as well. And women have their strengths and women have their bad habits. And I really appreciated this. Jane Austen handling that dynamic so well.
Oh, I do too. And I think both the men and the women they're so real. I mean, there's some writers who can only write one or the other well. And I think that she has really well fleshed out men and women. I think they're all different from each other. She doesn't sex stereotype, but at the same time, she does show these sort of patterns of how do women behave when they're with other women. And she does show, she doesn't show often men where there are no women present. And, we think, well, that's because she didn't know what men talked about behind closed doors when there weren't women present. So she didn't try to depict that. But she does show Darcy and Bingley interacting. So I think she does understand how men interact with other men. But she sticks with what she knows, and she really knows it. She really knows human nature.
Jane Austen here does a really good job of drawing compelling characters. I say I sympathized a lot, and I related a lot to Elizabeth, despite the fact that she was a woman. And see, that's what a good character is. Despite the fact that she was a woman, her character is somebody, me, a man, in the 21st century, was able to relate to her character as a woman back in this time. And that's excellent writing. And that's excellent character development. And she's really good at that. And, what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, I totally agree. I think she depicts women and men as being, fully rounded out people. She thinks about what it's like from the inside to be that person, as well as how does that person come across to other people. She's able to see all of those things at one time and depict them, and so concisely, like we were talking about with the opening line, where one sentence you get both this is how people think, and you get the sort of wink of, well, this is how I actually think about it. You get all of those things at one time, and it's so much harder to do that than you necessarily realize. Like, just reading through this book, it isn't like dense and difficult like if you're reading James Joyce or something. I mean, but there's so much there just packed in there. It's really hard to write that well. I mean, almost no one has ever done it except her. And
she does it with a good sense of humor too. And I think that's what makes it so appealing as well. She really has a very good sense of humor when it comes to without being overtly silly or overtly stereotypical. She's just, I don't know, she's very subtle. She's very subtle with her humor. Her humor doesn't just leap off the page. But there are times I very rarely laugh out loud at books. But this one, especially when it comes to Mr. Collins, I was just like, oh man, and that just really it wasn't some super silly scene, but he was just so subtly obnoxious and just anyway. We'll talk about Mr. Collins later, but she does a very good job of injecting subtle humor, and that's what makes her writing so appealing and her characters so well developed. Now, let's kind of move on from the ball here. After the ball, as you can imagine, nobody had good things to say about Darcy. Mrs. Bennet was actually quite bitter. Quite harsh. Lizzie loses nothing by having him not like her. He's nothing for her. He's a most disagreeable. He's a horrid man. She's just so over dramatic with everything. And Austen put it. His character was decided. He was the proudest, most disagreeable man in the world, and everybody hoped that he would never come there again. I mean, that's a line from the book. It's so overdramatic. Nobody likes the man. Everybody hopes he stays away. His character is decided by the consensus of other people. And I just found, that again, that goes back to that superficiality there. Just little stuff like that I found to be quite funny. But again, it's the opinions of other people that establish fact. And that's what they think the fact is for Darcy. It's that he's a horrid, wretched man who nobody likes and nobody ever could possibly like. And I quite detest the man. That's what she said. And everything is spoken in such absolutes. There is no good to be found in Darcy at all. He is absolutely, totally just bad, and then Mrs. Bennet takes her assumptions and her opinions as just gospel truth. There can be no argument. This case is settled. Darcy is just a filthy, horrible person. I just thought that was funny.
That's right. Yeah. she doesn't have a very subtle view of people. She doesn't see the shades of gray. I mean, and I think in part it's because she's looking at, well, what can they do for her? And
Right.
given the way he treated Elizabeth, he didn't take any interest in them, wasn't friendly to them. There's nothing he can do for them. Well, he's useless.
Right. Yes, exactly. He is of no use to me. Therefore, he is totally useless as a person. And I think that's excellent because it's a very self-centered mindset, you know? And just, and I'm not saying Mr. Bennett should make fun of his wife or laugh at her and ridicule her, but I can see why he thinks she's funny, you know, because she's so, just to sit back and watch her put on this over dramatic show, and you know, her opinions are just so important. I mean, she's got an opinion on everybody and everything, and her opinions are always kind of half-cocked and thoughtless, but there are people like that. That's a real people. There's so many people that are willing to voice their opinions, and they just base their opinions. They take them, I have an opinion, and therefore that is gospel fact. You're never going to change my mind about it. And they base their opinion just on like superficial assumptions. That's a real person. There are a lot of people who act that way, just like Miss Bennett.
Well, I mean, that's where the humor comes from, is because we've seen that before, and that's why it's funny. I mean, otherwise it would just be like, well, why would someone act that way? I mean, the whole humor is that she's depicting something true about human nature.
Yes.
And one thing I like about Mrs. Bennett that's funny is that she has zero knowledge about herself. I mean, she'll say things like, well, I never complain. People who never complain are never pitied. And it's like, well, what do you think you're doing right now?
Yeah, she wants pity.
I mean, she says so many things about herself. She has no idea what kind of person she is. So, of course, she has no idea what kind of people. She doesn't know anybody else either.
She's not self-reflective at all. And she never stops and thinks about what she's going to say before she says it. She just emotes. She just verbally emotes. You know what I mean? I'm feeling this.
Mm-hmm.
And you often know that our feelings often don't always make sense. You know what I mean? Our feelings aren't always reasonable. We may have an opinion or a feeling that's not correct at all. But, you know, I just don't like that person. Why? I don't like the way he parts his hair. Therefore, I don't like that person. You know, that's just a nonsensical reason to not like somebody. And that's what Mrs. Bennett does. She just emotes verbally. There's no thought or reason or rationale to it at all. Her little tirades.
Wouldn't you agree, Colin? Wouldn't you agree that if she had been married to a husband who would sort of listen to her patiently and say, well, maybe think about this, maybe consider that the way someone parts his hair doesn't tell you anything about his character. I mean, maybe with a better husband that she might have sort of learned to control her own emotions and maybe have more self-awareness. Well, I was going to say part of the problem is she isn't naturally intelligent the way Mr. Bennett is, but she's very unaware of like what she doesn't know. I mean, she isn't aware that she has any kind of deficiency in her judgment of other people.
And aren't those the most dangerous people? They're
right. That's what's it's okay not to know things, but what is dangerous is not to know that you don't know, and that's the position Mrs. Bennett is in.
It's so true. It's so true. And
because we all are stupid at times. We do. Even a lot of times, right? And I think that's like part of what you get from this book is it makes me stop and think, well, how often am I just, flying off or making a judgment or just being really stupid and I don't know it. And I don't know. I just feel like reading Jane Austen, it makes me think about things like that more. Like
that's why it's so important to have a spouse, would be it a husband or a wife, that will actually listen to you. That way you don't go through and voice these ridiculous opinions in public. They serve as a good filter because there will be times, here at the house, and I do it. I sound something off to my wife. This person did this, and it really aggravated me. Or what? And she'll be like, "You're totally misreading that." And I'll be like, "Really?" She's like, "Yes, that's incorrect." And I'll be like, "Oh, okay." And then she'll explain why I'm incorrect, and then I'll be like, "Huh. Well, that just completely went over my head. I didn't pick up on that or whatever, And it's good to have somebody who will listen to you. They provide a good filter. and they keep you from making a public fool of yourself, and that's why that's where Mr. Bennett fails. If he did actually listen to his wife, maybe she wouldn't feel the need to go say this stuff to anybody who will listen, because she knows her husband won't really listen to her. So she'll just talk to anybody who's willing to give her an ear, or just anybody who's not even.
That's really true.
And that's
just anybody.
Right. And that's where it's so important. That's where Mr. Bennett fails as a husband. And that's why it's so important as a husband or as a wife to actually listen to what your spouse is saying and what they feel, because oftentimes you're that sounding board that they need to know whether what they're saying is right or what they're saying is erroneous, and that's what part of it. It's hard to make the time to listen to somebody you don't respect, and that's why it's so important to marry somebody that you really respect and that you have affection for, is because when I start mouthing off, Amanda will listen to me and she'll set me straight, and she'll do it in a nice way. And I'll do the same with her. You have to learn how to interact with each other. And that's why they're married. That's why this family seems so chaotic. And you can trace it back to the marriage deficiencies of Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. I mean, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it goes to his relationships, especially with the younger daughters too. He doesn't listen to them. Well, why does he think they act so silly and go running off trying to get attention from any man? Well, I don't know. Maybe if their father paid more attention to them. I mean, it's almost a cliche, but Jane Austen saw it, and it's a pattern you see in real life. A girl who doesn't get the attention and the security from her father, it doesn't set up a girl to make wise decisions.
So they end up going with whoever gives them attention, be it a good man or a bad man. They end up, being attracted to the person who just shows them the affection that they, or just not even the affection, the attention that they want. And that's when girls get mixed up with bad guys. And
it happens. Yeah.
Speaking of lesser men, let's move on and talk about Wickham and Collins here for just a second, okay? And the difference between the two. We'll get more into Mr. Collins here in just a second, and we'll get more into Wickham later on in the story. But Wickham looks good on the surface, right? He's kind of handsome. He's a soldier. He just on a superficial level, he looks like a good catch, right? Wickham would have been a socially acceptable choice for marriage for Elizabeth. Because he puts on a good front. I mean, just looking at a superficial judgment of the man, if she were, because she had a chance to marry both Wickham and Collins if she had so chosen to pursue those, and she. Well,
in a way, I don't know if she could have married Wickham.
Well, right, but I mean, they were kind of, almost interacting there a little bit. Had she?
I mean, he's a suitor. I mean, he's definitely an alternative suitor.
Right. And
Collins Wickham and Collins are both in their sort of opposite ways, the bad suitors for Elizabeth.
Right. And Collins is he looks good on paper. He might not be as attractive as Wickham. He might not be he's not a soldier. He's not dashing. Kind of like Wickham was. But Collins has a good little support system there, and while he might not have had the physical attraction, he definitely had the stability, the social stability, and financial stability. And both of these men were potential suitors, particularly Colin, more than just a suitor. Collins, he actually asked Elizabeth to marry him, and she shot both of them down. And and we'll get into again. We're holding Elizabeth off here for the end. But if Elizabeth wanted to make a safe choice, a safe social choice, she could have gone with Wickham. If she wanted to make a safe, social stability choice, she would have gone with Collins. But she shot both of those guys down, and those were two safe choices, is what I'm getting at. And she rejected both of them because her affection for them was not real, and she could have made the safe play. But and this goes into her courage and her integrity. She chose not to make the safe play. She wanted to make the right play. And I just real quick, Wickham, everybody gives their opinion about Darcy. I want to say what Wickham says here about Darcy. Wickham says of Darcy, the world is blinded by his fortune and consequence, or frightened by his high and imposing manners, and sees him only as he chooses to be seen. And that's the difference between somebody like Darcy and Wickham. Darcy portrays himself as he is. Wickham is a complete phony. You know what I mean? Darcy, yeah. I mean, Darcy's not trying to put on a front. You know, not so much of a front. He might be a little more, you know, putting up more of a barrier there, you know, to kind of keep away the phonies, but he's not pretending to be somebody else altogether. Wickham was really just a complete and total phony, you know, and that's just the contrast between somebody like Darcy and somebody like Wickham. What are your thoughts about going into what we're going to talk about with Colin's proposal? What are your just initial comments about Collins and Wickham and these guys? We'll kind of mention them here, but we'll get into them in later episodes. But what are your thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, I think that's interesting what Wickham said about Darcy, like saying what people see of Darcy is what Darcy chooses them to see. That's really not true. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say everybody, but people are offended by Darcy. I mean, what Wickham says about Darcy is true about Wickham, that Wickham is the one who is able to get people to see him the way he wants him to be seen. In fact, everything he says about Darcy, like claiming that Darcy has done this injustice to Wickham, right. You go through all the accusations he made against Darcy are not true, but they are true about Wickham.
And that's what people like Wickham do. They project. Mm-hmm. They take their, and you see this in a lot of people, you know, in politics today. People project you're a racist when maybe they're the ones who are actually having, you know, racist tendencies or whatever, you know. And you see a lot of people, and it's not just in politics or whatever, the political discourse, that's in everyday life. People always shoot down other people for the things they're guilty of themselves. Yeah, and Wickham is doing that mm-hmm. here because that's one way. He's one of those guys. That's one way he looks more appealing is by tearing down other people and defaming the character of men who are clearly better than he is. And Wickham knows it, and that's what makes him so sinister. I think is because he's willing to just flat out lie about people, and he does that with Darcy. You know, it was. Mm-hmm. Like I said, he was just superficially very handsome. He's a soldier. He looks like he's a good choice. But Elizabeth doesn't really pursue that. And I really respected that about her. I really respect characters. See, that doesn't matter. Male or female, black, white, it doesn't matter. I respect characters that stay true to their integrity, that stay true to their principles and true to their values. And you can say what you want about Elizabeth. She has her faults as well. But she is a woman who knows what she wants, and she's not going to compromise on and take the safe choice or settle. She wants what she wants, and she's going to hold out for that. And she makes that clear. Let's get in. We've been talking about Elizabeth. Let's go ahead and get into her, and then we'll wrap up. And mm-hmm. I kind of want to talk about her character, and we're going to see how how she displays her character in this conversation she has with Charlotte. They discussed their conflicting views of marriage. This was Charlotte's view on marriage. Secure the man and then fall in love. Don't fall in love first and then get married. Go ahead and reel him in. And then once y'all are contractually obligated to each other, then try to fall in love. And then she says, when a woman is secure of him, like once you've gotten married, once you've got him latched in and there's nowhere for him to go, there will be leisure for falling in love as much as she chooses. Like love is something that you develop later on after you're already attached to each other for life. And that's kind of Charlotte's view of marriage. And Elizabeth replies to that. She says, your plan is a good one where nothing is in question but the desire of being well married. This is not quite enough to make her understand his character. And Elizabeth doesn't want to get married just for the sake of getting married. That's what Charlotte wanted. She just wanted to be married. She didn't care to who. She just wanted to be married to somebody of a stable social position. Whereas Elizabeth wanted to understand the man's character and actually have developed genuine feelings and affection for him before they get married. And so you see the two competing views of marriage there. And then Charlotte said, happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. The more you know someone, the more their vexations plague you. Therefore, it's better to know as little as possible of the defects of the person with whom you are to pass your life. So it's best, according to Charlotte, it's best to know as little about the person before you get married. So get married knowing just as bare minimum as possible. Basically, are they financially stable? Are they not an axe murderer? Or, something like that. Will I be provided for? Okay. He meets these three. Is he not hideously deformed or whatever? Okay. He meets these superficial qualifications, and then let's get married. And then if we fall in love, we fall in love. That's just a matter of chance. And Elizabeth replies, she said, "You make me laugh, Charlotte, but it's not sound." And she tells her this. This is Elizabeth speaking bluntly. Mm-hmm. What you're saying is not right. It doesn't make any sense. And then she says, it's not sound.
She says you would never act that way yourself.
This way. Yeah, exactly. You'd never act this way yourself. And again, I really appreciate Elizabeth's forthrightness. I like people who speak bluntly, not disrespectfully, but bluntly. Mm-hmm. Okay, some people think they equate being blunt with being disrespectful. Well, you're just an idiot, or something like that. No, that's not.
Right.
That's disrespectful. You can convey that same message bluntly and still be respectful about it. And Elizabeth is very blunt, saying, "What you're saying is not right. It doesn't make any sense." And I don't believe that at all. And, Elizabeth, of course, is more interested in marriage for love, genuine affection rather than some sort of social convenience. And I mean, let's talk about Elizabeth here. And Charlotte seems to be kind of the example of the typical superficial reasons to get married, whereas Elizabeth is kind of almost on an island on her own. She doesn't want to just meet these social conventions. She actually wants to marry somebody because she wants to marry them. And I think that says a lot about her. It's easy to get behind somebody who has strong principles. For me, it is. And that's one thing I really liked about her. She's a very strong-willed woman, and she has strong principles that she will not compromise on.
I agree. And she has seen the ways that marriage can go wrong, and she still, I guess, holds out hope that this is possible. And I think Charlotte has thought through her views a lot, and I think she thinks this is pragmatic, this is realistic. I think she's probably looked at a lot of marriages and seen, well, none of them are very good. It's convenient. I mean, you got to get married, but none of these people are really very happy. That's what she thinks is reality for some reason. It's not. But Elizabeth has seen unhappy marriages, but somehow she understands that it is possible to have a happy marriage. And I think that maybe is the difference between her and Charlotte, is maybe a little more imagination, or just maybe she doesn't take two pieces of evidence and think, well, that's all of reality. She understands it's complicated. There's good marriages and there are bad marriages, and you've got to make the right decision. Where Charlotte says, well, basically, you're going to end up irritated with this person anyway. Well, I mean, it's not going to make any difference in the long run.
Right, and of course, that's what leads to these unhappy marriages, or these affectionless marriages that are done strictly for social convenience, and that's what perpetuates that. These people who compromise, and that's the price you pay. You trade physical provision, you get that, but then you have to trade off genuine affection. And you're in an affectionless marriage, or a low affection marriage, and you're kind of miserable, and you're bitter, and you're cynical, and that cycle just repeats. Whereas somebody like Elizabeth, she understands what it takes to have a happy marriage. You have to genuinely have love and respect for this person. And I'm not going to get married just to get married. And I'm not going to get married to please my parents. I'm not going to get married to please, nameless, faceless society out there. I'm going to get married to the man, in Elizabeth's perspective, of somebody who I actually have a connection with, and she's genuine affection, love, and we'll talk more about Collins here in a minute. Charlotte, she ends up getting married to Collins, and I think it was funny. We'll talk about this later too. It says Collins, like, what did he in the span of, what was it, just a few days, he proposed to two women? I mean,
3 days.
Was it 3 days he proposed to two women?
It was 3 days.
He was on the hunt, too, just for a wife, dude. It didn't matter who, just anybody who said yes. We'll get to Mr. Collins here in a minute. Charlotte upon getting married to Collins, Jane Austen writes this: without thinking highly either of men or matrimony, marriage had always been her object. Just marriage itself, to be married, not the person, but just to be married. It was the only honorable provision well-educated women of small fortune, and however uncertain of giving happiness, must be their pleasant preservation from want. So in other words, somebody of her social status, that was the only honorable outcome, was just to get married to somebody who could provide financial stability for her. And that's that, men tend to go for physical appeal, in women, and women are more attracted to men who can physically provide for them, be it financially or, security. So a man can be moderately attractive, but be worth $10 billion. And well, man, that dude is really hot now that I know he's worth $10 billion. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But a man,
Right.
if there's some old hag that's worth $10 billion, a man's going to say, I'm not messing with that, because he's worried more about looks and, physicality of looks. And Charlotte completely gives herself over to that temptation that affects all women. She's sacrificing what she knows to be right for the sake of provision, and she does that with Collins. Marriage was just something to do, and her idol was just to be married, not to be in a rewarding marriage, but just to be married. And I think that's really sad when you think about it. I think of Charlotte and Collins, and they're set, but their marriage comes with their own set of bars. Like prison bars. They're definitely boxed in. And I get really sad if I think too much about Collins and Charlotte, especially Charlotte, having to put up with Mr. Collins.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's an interesting phrase where she said, the author says, she never thought much of men or matrimony, but marriage was always her object. And it's almost like the contrast between marriage as a legal arrangement versus matrimony is like holy matrimony, a spiritual union between two people. She's not aiming for that. She's going for a contractual marriage relationship. It's a legal and economic structure, not a spiritual relationship. And I think that may be the difference. Elizabeth sees that's the possibility, that you can have a real spiritual union with another person. Right.
And Charlotte, you are legally bound to provide for me. I will have a house, I will have food. And it's not so much you are spiritually, morally obligated. That doesn't really matter. You've cast that. You are legally bound. And that's, if somebody's doing something because they're legally bound, there's no affection there. But if somebody's doing something because they are spiritually bound because they want to, and that's what Elizabeth understands, and a lot of these people don't. And
that's right.
I think that one other thing I really liked about Elizabeth, and you could tell that she was really interested in marriage for the authenticity of affection there. Elizabeth has a really strong sense of family, and I think that's a kind of a good reflection of her views on marriage. And what I mean, like, she has a strong sense of family. Like when Jane was sick, at Bingley's estate, and Elizabeth stayed by her side the entire time. And Elizabeth, I think she said, did not quit her room for a moment, And then when she heard that Jane had become ill, she walked the distance to the estate rather than wait. The distance is nothing when one has a motive, is what Elizabeth said. And in other words, her sister was sick, and she needed somebody there who cared for her to tend to her. And the distance doesn't matter. I'll walk in the rain and the mud, and I don't care what I look like when I get there, and I don't care what people say about me. I'm going to go take care of my family. And I just think that she has a strong sense. I think that just shows she has a strong sense of family. And I think that reflects also in her desire to marry for affection and not just marry for convenience. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. There was a line that I really liked when she's at Netherfield, and she does her duty and goes down to visit with the other people, and then she leaves. And it sort of says she knows that they were going to talk about her and abuse her once she leaves, and she just doesn't care.
She doesn't.
Those girls, Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley, she knows what they're like. She really does have insight into human nature. She knows what kind of women they are, and she doesn't care what they think. I mean, she knows they're going to say all kinds of bad things about her, and she doesn't care.
And she's always happy for Jane's success. You know, she never gets bitter. She never gets envious. She is genuinely happy that her sister is happy. And that's genuine affection for somebody else. She has that strong sense of family, and I think that's what motivates her. And again, the distance is nothing if you've got the motivation. And I think that applies to her outlook for marriage too. I'll wait for as long as I have to make sure I make the right decision. I'm properly motivated, so the distance is not a thing for me. I'll wait to make sure I get hooked up with the right guy, the guy I want to get hooked up with. And I really admire her for that. And you know, one other thing that Darcy really likes about Elizabeth, and we mentioned this earlier, is her frankness of speech. You know, Darcy's not somebody who suffers fools, and I can, you know, Mrs. Bennet dislikes Darcy. Well, I can't help but think that Darcy would dislike Mrs. Bennet just as much, because he doesn't look like he would put up with all that over dramatic nonsense. But you know, I really, you know, Darcy, Elizabeth, she criticizes, or I don't know how she criticizes, and she makes some comment about Darcy writing slow or something like that. And Darcy
I think it was Miss Bingley.
Oh, well, you know, Darcy said something like the power of doing anything with quickness is always much prized by the possessor, and often without any attention to the imperfection of the performance. And you know, she was speaking to Darcy about that. So doing things quickly will cause you to, you know, make bad decisions, but you know, taking your time on doing stuff makes, you know, what you're doing worthwhile. And you know, at first she didn't like Darcy, you know, because he rejected her. She thought that he judged her, and he did kind of judge her. Tell me a little bit about that, because he wasn't initially attracted to Elizabeth either. It wasn't until they got to be, I don't say they were forced to interact with each other, but they were in the same places at the same time, and he really got to see more of her spirit and more of her attitude and more of her independence that really that kind of changed Darcy's mind about Elizabeth. Am I correct in that?
I think that's right. And I think you have to go back to that initial ball where they first met.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's probably been dragged there by his friend. He doesn't want to meet people, you know, and so he's exactly. So he's looking to find fault. And so, of course, well, you know, anybody, you're looking at them to find fault. He's assuming these are all just ignorant country people. It's not anybody that he would want to talk to. That's the assumption that he's making about all of them. And so I think that's why he's initially not that interested in her. I mean, not because Elizabeth is pretty, but I mean, he's saying, well, not handsome enough to tempt me. Well, he's just trying to get his friend off his back. He doesn't want to, he just doesn't want to socialize with anybody. It's not, he doesn't really think she's ugly or anything like that. But I think you're right. Once he's in the same house with her and interacting with her, he sees who she really is.
There's a point when they were dancing, and there was some kind of tension, and I mean kind of awkward, bad tension between the two of them, not some sort of, you know, sexual tension or anything like that, but they were dancing, and Elizabeth grew, you know, weary of carrying the conversation, and she just flat out told Darcy, it's your time to talk. You should talk about something now, you know, and
yes,
it's that sort of frankness that I think we could avoid a lot of arguments. Couples could avoid a lot of arguments if they were a little more frank in their speech. You know, rather than doing a lot of this passive-aggressive nonsense, we should just take Elizabeth's approach. You're aggravating me. Here's why. You know, and just explain it. And she does that with Darcy. Yeah. He tries to pull that antisocial nonsense with her, and she calls him on it. She's got the guts to tell the man, look, I'm doing all the talking here, and I'm going to stop now because I'm not going to carry this conversation. It's your turn. And I think it's little stuff like that. Darcy, you've got antisocial people like Darcy, and I think that sometimes those people enjoy somebody who will speak frankly to them and kind of put them in their place. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what won Darcy over, I think, was her frankness of speech and her willingness to stand up to him and not be not try to impress him, I guess. You know, do the typical trying to impress Darcy because he's a man with money. I'll say whatever I think to you, and he'll say, I appreciate that, man. I really like this girl. I mean, right? Because he does develop a genuine affection for Elizabeth.
Well, because, he's not really good at social niceties either. And with someone like Elizabeth, he doesn't have to do any of that. He can say what he thinks. He's free to say what he really believes or something genuine because she's speaking bluntly to him. It's not like going into a room where there's just pretense on all sides.
Right.
And you don't know where you are. And I think that's one thing he likes about talking to her is that he doesn't have to pretend because she won't pretend either.
Right. There's no pretending. There's no putting on phony airs. Okay, it's us expressing our genuine selves to each other, and I think that's what attracts these two. Elizabeth, in fact, she said something about her and Darcy having similar mindsets. She said, "We are each of an unsocial, taciturn disposition, unwilling to speak, unless we expect to say something that will amaze the whole room and be handed down to posterity, with all the glory of a proverb." And I really, not saying something unless there's something worthy to be said. And you got people like Mrs.
I don't
Bennett.
think she's really like that, though. And he calls her out on that, too. I mean, he says, this is no very striking resemblance to your own character. And I don't think it is. I think she's just picking at him. She's teasing him.
You think so?
She's not doing it directly. Yeah, I think she's teasing him because I don't think she's an unsocial person. I think she'll say whatever. I think she's uncovering his character in a sort of indirect way. But I think he knows exactly what she's doing. He knows exactly what she's saying.
She's quote unquote antisocial in the fact that she will say what's on her mind. And to some people that is antisocial. And that's of course what impresses Darcy is that she says what's on her mind. And like she'll tell Charlotte, I completely disagree with what you're saying. In fact, it's so ridiculous. I know you can't believe this either. And some people would label that sort of frankness as antisocial. So I don't know. I kind of, and you know more about the book than I do, but I kind of took it as there is a connection there between the two because some would see Elizabeth as not near as antisocial as Darcy, nowhere near on that, but she may have her quote unquote antisocial tendencies. And and maybe I just like that line because it's true. Only saying something if it's true and it's worth saying, not talking just to be talking to fill the silence. I can't, Evie, I get really jazzed and really energized if I'm having an in-depth conversation about something that matters, or at least matters to me and matters to the person I'm talking with. It may not matter to anybody else, but it matters to us. What wears me out and bores me to tears is small talk. Oh my gosh. Maybe I like that line so much because I feel the same way. If we're going to talk, let's talk about something that's worth talking about. I really don't care about small talk. Let's just go ahead and let's talk business. If we're going to talk, let's talk. And I really like that line because that kind of sums up my opinion. I'd like to be able to say that to people sometimes. Can we just skip all the small talk and get to what we want to talk about here? Yeah, let's talk about something worth talking about. But I really like that line. And maybe I'm wrong, but I kind of thought Elizabeth was somewhat correct in that. Maybe they both are a little antisocial. I wouldn't describe Elizabeth as antisocial because she's not. But she does speak her mind, and that might off-put some people.
Well, here's what I think. I think that Elizabeth is good at small talk and Darcy is not. I think Elizabeth she knows how to do all the socially agreeable things, but I think that she really thinks that stuff is stupid. And I think when she says that to Darcy, he's saying, well, this is no very striking resemblance to your own character. Well, no, it's not. But I think she does see that similarity, that the reason he acts the way he does is because he also thinks this small talk and this insincere comments and just saying things to be saying things. I think she also, I would agree. I think she also thinks that stuff is stupid, but I think she's good at it. And I think that's the difference between them.
Would you say that Darcy is aware of his faults?
Yes, I would. I think he's very self-aware.
He understands how he comes across. And in fact, as we kind of talked about, it's almost kind of on purpose, right? To an extent. I
think that's true. Yeah. But I like I said, I think a big part of it is that he's not good at it. And so he's stopped trying. And because also he's got enough friends, he doesn't have to try to please people. He never seems to succeed when he does try to please people, so why bother? And then you see later in the book, he starts to make more of an effort because he understands that it's important to be polite.
Well, in fact, when he starts developing an affection for Elizabeth, like when was it her? It was Miss Bingley and Elizabeth. They walk around the room together. Darcy's like reading a book or something, and he's very into it. He knows why they're walking. They're trying to get his attention, and he doesn't give it, And but when Miss Bingley but when Elizabeth walks up, agrees to it. It says, but once Liz agreed, Mr. Darcy looked up then at that point, kind of unconsciously closed his book. And Elizabeth knows how to draw Darcy's attention. And the fact that he is attracted to her, but yet he still holds back on expressing his feelings. Right? I was always...
Well, that's true.
He was so determined for a while there to not let her know how he felt and to almost be antisocial with her, to keep her even though he really liked her. And that's why his proposal kind of came out of nowhere, for her, when he proposed to her.
Well, that's true, yeah. And for him. Well, because he does think she's socially beneath him.
Okay. So explain this to me.
He really does think that.
Okay. Because I know her family was kind of, had some baggage and stuff, So that's why he kind of was a little... kept her at arm's length, because he was still reconciling his emotions with these people she is socially beneath me, but I still have these affections for her. Is that why he was so hesitant to express his affection to her at first?
Yes, I think that's how it's explained in the book, and I think that's right. I think he has to overcome that. It's, the mother is so vulgar, and the sisters are vulgar and silly, right. And he sees all of that, and I think Darcy is a little bit more hung up on social expectations than Elizabeth is, and he has to his feelings help him overcome that. I think she, at the start of the book, already thinks all these social expectations are stupid, but I think that he's got a certain position, and his family is expected to behave a certain way. I mean, it sort of comes out later in the book. His mother is the daughter of an earl. His father doesn't have a title, but I mean, they're much higher up socially than the Bennets, and
he's still
someone like Mrs. Bennet.
He's still sorting all that out. Okay,
I think that's right. I think that's right.
All right, Evie. Now we get to me. One of the funniest parts in the whole book was the proposal by Mr. Collins to Elizabeth. Mr. Collins is a complete joke. He is not antisocial. He is socially awkward. You understand the difference between the two? There's somebody antisocial. That means they're not really putting forth much of an effort. In fact, they're kind of antagonistic toward people. But socially awkward people, or maybe people that don't know what to do, but they try or something, and Mr. Collins falls completely into that socially awkward category. Now, Mr. Collins, he has a stable, financial situation. He's a member of the clergy, okay? He's got a nice little parsonage to live in, and there's Miss de Berg, who is, she provides consistent financial support to him, right?
That's right, yeah.
And she's well-to-do. And so he's got that nice little, on paper, a nice little stable position there. Now,
and he's going to inherit Mr. Bennet's estate.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. He's going to inherit Mr. Bennet's estate. That is exactly right. So he's got a nice, stable position. Any woman who was really looking for stability would really be, Collins is a good match on paper, but on the trade-off, he's Mr. Collins.
That's right.
He's socially awkward, and he falls in. He has this tendency that men have a tendency to do. Women have their tendencies, their bad tendencies, and men have their bad tendencies. And how do I know? Because I am capable of doing this too. And here's what it is. Men find themselves more attractive or more appealing than they actually are. You know what I mean? And Mr. Collins thinks that he's more appealing than he really is. And sometimes if I start to think that way, here's why knowing yourself and knowing your deficiencies is so well. If I start to think, I'm trying to be cute or whatever, you're not being that cute, and so so he thought men do that. Men oftentimes think that they're more appealing than they actually are. And if a woman is, and this doesn't really have anything to do with the book, but I don't do this now. I'm married, because I don't care. I have 2 minivans. I've got 4 kids. I don't care about being cool anymore. But like if you were younger and unmarried, okay, if a woman was nice to you, like let's say a waitress in a restaurant or something, and she smiles at you and she's nice, a man is immediately going to think, or at least most men, she likes me. She's being nice to me. She must romantically like me. But then you have to remember, well, they do work on tips, so I don't think she really likes you. She's just angling for a good tip, and men oftentimes think that they're more appealing than they are, and they can misinterpret, a woman just being polite for a woman thinking that woman actually likes them. And Mr. Collins does that here, okay? He thinks he's more of a catch than he really is, correct? I mean, he's got a good little situation, but he's got a lot of hang-ups with him too, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, talk about not knowing what you don't know. One of my favorite lines with Mr. Collins is when he's going to introduce himself to Mr. Darcy at the ball, and we understand in that social context, this is just a huge faux pas. You don't go up to your social superior and introduce yourself. You would do that now. That's
right.
With some, it wouldn't be the thing now that it is. That it would be then, although in some cases it would be. But he's just going to go up to Mr. Darcy and introduce himself, and Elizabeth is like, no, you really shouldn't do that. And I love this. He says, my dear Miss Elizabeth, I have the highest opinion in the world of your excellent judgment in all matters within the scope of your understanding. I love it. This is the way.
He's so above
as a woman, we've all interacted with men who are like that, of, you ladies, I have so much respect for you ladies within the scope of your understanding.
Yeah, I'm so much above you. Oh, look at you trying to make an effort. I know so much more than you do. Yeah, he's totally, that makes him, it's so off-putting and unappealing, but it's so funny at the same time. He's a real piece of work. He's really, he really thinks highly of himself. Mr. Collins thought too well of himself to comprehend on what motive his cousin could refuse him. I mean, when he asked Elizabeth to marry him, he couldn't think of any reason why she would be saying no. And even though she was clearly saying no, I understand that you have to go through these motions. You have to, in order to be modest, and you have to, he really didn't think, he thought that he was really a good catch. And for somebody to say no to him was not really part of the equation. For somebody who was I don't know, he really thought somebody who had such deficiencies, I guess I'll say, he really thought highly of himself.
Well, he's totally unaware of that, though. I mean, and he makes up these little compliments, and he thinks that everybody is so charmed by them. And you have to feel sorry for him, because he really does. That's why it's funny and not just malicious. I mean, he's not trying to bully Elizabeth at all. Like, he sincerely believes that his own judgment is better, and that's what's hilarious about it.
He almost believes he's doing her a favor.
Yes, he believes that he is being kind to her.
Yes,
he's right. She's wrong, but he's going to say it in a polite way. I have so much respect for your judgment.
I'm going to set you straight there.
He's going to be kind to her, but but put her in her place, because he knows so much more about society than she does, and that's why it's funny. And I think he's a young man, and I think that happens to young men a lot.
Yes.
They haven't had someone to sort of explain things or put them in their place, and they think they know things. And it happens to women as well, but I mean, you particularly see that sometimes.
I found this comment to be quite funny. As per Mr. Collins, it does not appear to me that my hand is unworthy your acceptance, or that the establishment I can offer would be any other than highly desirable. In other words, he's a highly desirable guy. I can't imagine any reason why you would say no. Your acceptance to not do so is obviously based on ignorance. You know, it's not based on any sound judgment, you know, and he just has such a high opinion of himself. I just found that's what got me to really laugh at first. I was kind of just like, oh, but then as he went on, I couldn't help but just start laughing at the guy. It became so comedic because it was so obnoxious.
Well, I mean, you can see where he gets, okay, because first of all, I think he's not super perceptive of how other people are responding.
Yes.
I mean, she's saying no, and he's not listening. He's not hearing what she's saying. But his understanding of how society works is not totally wrong. I mean, like you said, he is a catch in many ways. He's already got a good income. He's going to have an even better income in the future. And his character is not bad. I mean, he's a well-meaning guy. He's not going to run around on you. He's not going to abuse you. He's, you know, he's not an alcoholic. There's so many bad things that he is not. He's an okay guy. He's just, the problem is a smart woman can't respect him. I mean, that's really just the only real problem with him. He is an okay guy.
And he is completely under the thumb of Lady de Burgh.
Well, that's right, yeah.
I mean, in everything he does, he has to, again, seek her approval and seek her opinion. And that's the reason why he's hunting a wife in the first place, is because she told him it was about time he got married.
I love it when he's explaining the reasons for marriage, and he gets to, well, number 3, my noble patrons, and he says, number 3, which perhaps I should have mentioned first.
He has such a list. Anytime you have a list of reasons why we should get married, I think you're already fighting from behind at that point. You know, it's an uphill battle. Then.
Oh boy!
I can see if a PowerPoint were back, he would have a PowerPoint display and like a little laser pen pointing to everything. You know, here's why this business transaction makes sense. You know? I like, and Elizabeth, she tries to be polite. You know, she really, and this is what I admire. She tries to be polite, and then she never does get really rude, but she does have to get very blunt with them. He will not accept no for an answer. He thinks she's putting on a show, or, you know, doing the socially acceptable modesty thing. And she's like, no, look, I'm not going, she tells him, you could not make me happy. And I am convinced that I'm the last woman in the world who would make you so. You know, she said, I'm persuaded that, you know, she would find me in every respect ill-qualified for the situation. I mean, she's telling him, I'm not the woman for you. You're not the man for me. You would not make me happy. I know I would not make you happy, and nor would I make this Lady de Burgh happy. So I'm not just saying no. I mean, it's not just you repulse me. I wouldn't be good for you either. This would not be a happy marriage. And then she said something I underlined here in the book. I really like this. She says, do not consider me now as an elegant female intending to plague you, but as a rational creature speaking the truth from her heart. I mean, she said that, I mean, I don't know how more bluntly, I am telling you the truth. You know, you must give me leave to judge for myself. And that right there is the appeal of Elizabeth. She is independent. She will not compromise on her own integrity and on her own values, her own principles. She will not do it. Some people, this is what people do. They call independent people stubborn. They like with her parents. You know, make her come to reason. You know, Mrs. Bennet. Oh, I will make her come to reason. I will make her marry you. And then when she can't do it, she runs off to Mr. Bennet. Make her see reason here. You know, like make her. And Elizabeth will not be made to do anything. You know, they call people like that stubborn. They call people like that hard-headed. They won't listen to reason. That's what they call independent people. And she's not being, I mean, she's being stubborn, I guess, in a good sense. The fact that she won't compromise. You know, there's a good stubborn, there's a bad stubborn. I would say good stubborn would be more just, you know, convicted. You know, she's standing in her convictions. And it was this scene right here where I always kind of liked Elizabeth, you know, but it was this scene right here that really, okay, I like this girl. You know, I like her. I can really get behind her now because she was really put to the test. And she was, if she were really cared about being socially taken care of, you know, having a good social circumstance, she would have taken this here. She would have compromised. And she would have inherited her own estate, you know, because he was set to inherit that estate, and she would, and then of course her family would be well taken care of as well, whatever. But she says, nope, I'm going to do the right thing, and let me make up my own mind. And that's respectable to me. That she earned my full respect right there, in spite of whatever her flaws may be. My full respect goes out to Elizabeth Bennet right there. This is what a strong female looks like. This is what a strong person looks like. Somebody who will not compromise. And I love this character. I love her. She's an excellent female character, an excellent character in general.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And yeah, to back up what you're saying, what Mr. Collins mentions in this scene, he says, well, there's no guarantee you'll ever get another proposal of marriage. He is absolutely correct. And that's what's at stake here. She has such a regard for what marriage is that even doing something that's going to seem like not just good for her, but could provide for her family. I mean, there is an argument to be made, a sort of utilitarian argument, that it would be the right thing for her to marry Mr. Collins. It's going to be the best for everybody. You need to compromise your own personal little desires to have a love marriage. But that's not right. I mean, she understands that marriage is something sacred. It is not a tool to be used to guarantee social position or economic advantage. She understands no matter how much it might benefit me or other people, this is a misuse of what marriage is.
Yes. Exactly.
I mean, do you agree with that? I don't think this is just about Elizabeth is a romantic and she's got these ideals and she wants to fall in love and have this, romantic love story. I think it's a real integrity that she understands. This is not the way you treat marriage, which is a sacred bond. This is not the way you treat other people, because this is using other people as an object to get an economic advantage. And I think she understands that's wrong. And
that's what makes this a moral issue. That's what makes it's not just some dumb 100%. Decision. It is a moral to compromise and treat somebody as a means to an end is an immoral thing to do. And to compromise on your integrity and what you know to be right is a moral thing. And Elizabeth is a moral character. She is a good example of somebody who will stand firm to do what is right, not just what's best for them, but the morally right thing to do. And the Bible's very clear. You do not dishonor the marriage bed. You do not dishonor marriage. That's not something you enter into lightly. And Elizabeth understands that. It is of the highest regard. God, in Scripture, there are three social institutions. There's the family, there's the civil government, and there's the church. And before all of those things, the family was formed first. They're in the garden with Adam and Eve. And that is something, therefore, it should not be taken lightly. It is a pillar and a foundation of a stable society. And Elizabeth understands that. So it's not just about, I want whatever makes me happy. I mean, she understands what true happiness is. Happiness is not just having things and having a stable situation in a house to live in. True contentment comes from having values and achieving those values, and doing it in a principled and moral way and not compromising. I mean, having things that you want to do and not compromising in achieving those things. And she wants a real marriage, not just a marriage of convenience, but a marriage that is grounded in spiritual affection. I mean, she loves this person. She understands his faults. He understands her faults, but yet they love each other anyway. And they realize that together they can do something and be something really special, and they don't have to be cynical and bitter, but they can actually show love. And that's what true marriage is. And is it work? Yes, it's work. Of course it's work. Anytime two people get together to try to do something, it's work, especially when it's two sinners, come together. It's going to be work and they're going to be hard times, but you do it, that the love overcomes that. And Elizabeth understands that. And that's why she is just an example that I will point to my children when they get to the point, men or women, boys or girls, they'll read this book. Yes. I'll say, this is how you need to be when it comes to standing up for what you believe and not taking the easy way out. There's a big difference between taking the easy way out and doing the right thing. And Elizabeth she took the chance. She took the chance and did the right thing. Yes, and it was risky. Hats off, total respect. Like I said, this point right here, it was funny with Collins, but at the same time, this was when I really got into the story. I mean, it was a good story. I was going along. I like Darcy, and all that stuff. But this is like, okay, I'm really invested in these characters here. I've got people that I can get behind, and bam, this was that part here. So the rest of the story, flows from this was like that first point. That's why we're ending on it here today. It's that first big point, and it passed that first test. I was like, okay, I want to see what happens with these people because I like these people,
Yeah. And the stakes have been ratcheted up for her.
They have, yes.
You understand what might become of her. There's several different bad things that could happen to her. If she were to go into a marriage like this, she could end up becoming bitter and cynical and disrespectful, like her father. She could become something like that, or she could become all these things that she recognizes are bad. And she's made that first decision that she's not going to be like that, but it could come with a price.
She takes a sure thing and throws it out the window because it's not the right thing. And she understands that. And that's good. And that's, like I said, that's respectable. And that's what a strong woman looks like. Forget man, woman. That's what a strong human being looks like. And that's worthy of respect right there. It's very well written. All right, Evie, you got anything else you want to say about Mr. Collins? I mean, I could really rag on this guy, but, let's show him a little bit of...
Well, you have to feel bad for him. I think he ends up with... Charlotte is a good wife to him, and their marriage is not a picture of an ideal. We'll get into that in volume 2, but there can be good that comes from that, even with it being imperfect, and I think that shows grace as well, and I think that is something we see in the story. I think it ends with Charlotte's decision to marry Mr. Collins, and for all the reasons we've discussed, I don't think it's the right decision. I think it dishonors holy matrimony. But at the same time, you understand why she did it, given the circumstances she was in and the risk that she would have taken in turning that down. And I do think I think you feel bad for Charlotte, but I think we see in the next volume, we can talk about this, that there is good that comes from that as well.
Yes.
But there's a greater good that comes from sticking by your principles and taking that risk. And that is, I don't know, just a lot that we can learn from Elizabeth, that she didn't know how her life was going to turn out after that. She could have ended her life in poverty as a result of that decision that she made. And she doesn't hesitate. That's one thing I respect about this, is she doesn't agonize about it and think, well, maybe I did the wrong thing. She doesn't think twice about it. It's just, this is what I'm going to do. And there's never a moment's regret about that at all.
I like decisive characters.
I do too.
I don't. Now, I'm not saying that they have to be, decisive 100% of the time, but I like characters who know what they believe and they know what they're going to do. Now, they may, agonize over the decision a little bit or whatever, but, they come to the conclusion and they say, all right, this is what I'm going to do and this is what's going to happen, and they do it. I like decisive characters, and Elizabeth Bennet is definitely a decisive character. All right, Evie, we're going to end it there. And I think this has been a really good book. It's a big transition to go from The Road to Pride and Prejudice. And they're both good books, and they're completely separate genres, completely different styles and types of books. But they're both equally good. I really enjoyed Pride and Prejudice first time I read it. And you were right. It's not just some chick lit book. It's a very good book with good characters. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of our discussion about it.
Oh, me too.
Okay. All right. We're going to go ahead and end it there. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We'll see you on the next episode. Y'all take care.